Yeah. May the Lord be with you. Amen. Do you remember the first time where you had an encounter of some kind with a beast? And here I'm thinking maybe you were at the zoo. Most likely that's where most of us would have this experience. Perhaps it was a tiger or an elephant, a shark or a lion. Picture in your mind, if you will, that time when you were probably younger and you came to an encounter with a beast. There was power on display in that moment. Perhaps it was a tiger. I remember seeing a tiger at the zoo. Not my first time. I can't quite picture my first experience of this, but a more recent one at the Winnipeg Zoo, just the muscles on the back and shoulder of the tiger as it loped. You can just feel and sense this is power. When you see this kind of power, you feel fairly small. Makes you feel more powerless. Yikes, I would not like to be at the mercy of the power of that beast. We often think of power in this way. Power as force. Power as a force that you can exert to make things happen the way you want them to happen. Hard power, if you will. There's also soft power. This is the power of attraction, where you can show somebody something that they like and attract them to it. A soft power and hard power. Push and pull. Now, some of us would like to have more power. Some of us would like to have more power. Some of us want more effective power. Our power maybe feels like it's not quite working the way it should. Some of us want power, but we don't want the responsibility that comes with it, but we'd sure like to have the influence. Some of us want power because we have good ideas and we'd like to help. Some of us want power because we long to do good things. None of us would like to have the power that we currently have taken away from us. If our power is threatened, that it might be removed, we feel unsafe. We feel insecure. We feel like we would no longer be free. The expectation that we have is that as we grow older, our power will actually increase. You will continue to move up the ladder and gain more and more power as you age and grow in competence and in authority. How does our desire for power, how does our feeling that our power might be threatened, how does this shape and impact the way that we can hear Jesus' voice? Is it possible that the way that we think about power, the way that we seek it, the way that I don't even think about power, maybe the way that we try to not think about power, or the way that we feel threatened about our power, can that influence the way that we hear Jesus' voice? The series that we're in, this is the second Sunday in that series, is called The Usual Suspects. What I want to do in this series is pay attention to listening to the voice of Jesus. And over the tradition of the Christian faith, the last 2,000 years, what we have discovered is that the way that you can listen to Jesus' voice is to pay attention if the usual suspects are cropping up. Perhaps you're trying to make a decision between two things. Usually that's the best way to make a decision. Take it down to two things, yes or no, this or that. And pay attention to each one. Am I saying yes to this because I long for something? And so those three suspects, the usual suspects, are power, fame, and money. And today we're going to be looking at power. Being a Christian is about growing up and learning to hear Jesus' voice, learning how to choose what to do and what not to do, learning how to live your life faithfully in alignment with Jesus Christ. So these usual suspects, paying attention to them, being sensitive to them, getting to know them by their voice and by what they look like, can help us to hear the voice of Jesus and to live our lives in alignment with Him. So today what I want to do, as we pay attention to this text, I want to first define power. What do we mean when we talk about power? What What could that be? So first, what is power? And then, what does it look like? How can we be sensitive to it in our lives? And then lastly, how can paying attention to this actually connect us to Jesus Christ? So first, what is power? Jesus asks these two men, James and John, "Are you able to drink from the cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they answer, "Yes, we are able. We have the power, and we would like to be recognized for the power that we have." For many of us, we have been raised, and in the Christian tradition, this often comes up, that power is a bad thing, and the desire for power is a bad thing. Notice that Jesus does not actually get upset at them for their request. Our sense is that power is a bad word, and this comes about because human beings have been corrupted by power. We know the line that absolute power corrupts absolutely, but it doesn't take us much to look around and say even a little bit of power can certainly corrupt a person quite a bit. Power, when it's connected with the idolatry of human beings, as we try to grab after something with power or for power, leads to injustice. Power gets used for self-gain. Maybe it's to control your legacy, what people think of you. Maybe power is used for the accumulation of wealth. You'll notice that power, fame, and wealth will intersect and interweave with each other. Maybe the power is a lever that's used to secure yourself and the way the world would like you would like the world to be. You use power in order to make that happen. You're playing God, if you will. Maybe it's in a small sphere or sector, but you're taking power and using it to dehumanize another person, perhaps, to make their voice less and your voice more. In our current culture, one of the symbols of power is the gun. Those beasts are so powerful. So how do human beings react? How do we feel powerful? Well, that tool, the gun, makes us feel incredibly powerful. And we have a fantasization with this in our culture. It's in our movies, it's in our stories, and it's in our hobbies too. The gun becomes something that we fantasize about because it makes us to feel powerful, and it helps us feel safe because now we have the power. We're so used to power being defined this way. We have been drinking this Kool-Aid, if you will, that we have an understanding of what power looks like. The tiger, incredibly powerful, and we define power for human beings in a very similar way. It is white, it is male, and it is domination. This is our understanding of power. And if you want to be powerful, you end up wanting to look like a white male who has domination. This is power. It is colonialism. It is I know better than you. I have the power, and I will do it for you. This is our picture of power. And so that's why when we talk about power, there's a little sense of like, okay, I think we're getting into something that might not be good. Andy Crouch, in his book, Playing God, Redeeming the Concept of Power, I find this incredibly helpful. Andy Crouch tells us that power itself is not a corruption. Power itself is not the evil, but of course human depravity is what corrupts power and turns it. Power is not essentially coercive and violent and dominating. Power is the ability to make something in this world. At its deepest form, power is the ability to create. God is the ultimate power, and God is the ultimate creator. It wasn't meant to be coercive, violent, dominating, and evil. The way you read the first 11 chapters of the Bible, what I call the first book of the Bible. The second book of the Bible is Genesis 12 to Revelation 22. The way you read the first book of the Bible will impact and shape the way you read the rest of the Bible. So let's pay attention then to how power is first shaped and formed in Genesis 1 to 11. Power is given to the human beings. Be fruitful and multiply. Steward and rule over creation. This is power. It is meant for good. It is meant for incredible goodness. You need power to do the mission that we have been called to do well. If, as human beings, we are to fulfill what it means to be image bearers of God, then we are going to have to be powerful. In a good way, of course. To fulfill this concept of being fruitful and multiplying, stewarding and shepherding the earth and creation that God has placed us in as image bearers. Yes, human beings are a gross and horrible stain on creation. If you look at the world that we're in and you think, you know what, I wonder if it would be better if humans weren't here. You're actually in alignment with God. Genesis 1 to 11. God looked out over the earth at one point in those verses and said, I kind of wish I never made this, never made the humans. So, of course, you know the story. God, through a flood, wipes humans out to kind of begin again. But he does then promise, using the rainbow. The rainbow, of course, is his bow pointed into heaven. So God recognizes that, yes, human beings, through their depravity, their corruption of power, are in fact evil. But that doesn't, again, mean that power is evil. We are called to use and steward our power well, as ambassadors to all of creation. So we need to redefine power away from violence, away from dominating. Now, you have probably had an experience of creating something. For me, one of the great joys is in pottery. You take a lump of clay and you begin to first wedge it over and over on the table to get the platelets of clay lined up just right. And then you take the clay and slap it down on the wheel, and you spin the wheel up, a little bit of water, and you begin to center the clay on the wheel. You're pushing it towards the center, and you're pushing down on it using force and power. And then you begin to open the clay up, and of course, next you're going to pull up the sides and then shape it into a bowl or a mug. You get to choose. There's power in creating. I'm sure you've had the moment where you've been able to create something using power. Or perhaps it was fixing something or installing something. Just using a tool in this day and age feels powerful. If you've ever changed your own oil, you are establishing some measure of mastery over this machine and contraption. It's a form of power. Power is a gift. It's a good gift that God has given us. It's meant on some small level to reflect and help us to connect with His ability to create and to redeem, and to have authority in heaven and earth. That's God's power, and little bit by little bit, He gives us some of that. It's meant to be gifts and abilities, forces and authorities, given to us so that in humility we accept the talents that we've been given, and then we invest and steward those talents for the well-being of creation, stewarding and serving creation, reflecting God's rule and God's reign. Jesus tells us that the leadership and authority that He gives, that He wants us to have, is not meant for lording it over others. We're not supposed to use it for our own gain or to protect our own well-being. We're supposed to use it to serve others. Notice how God Himself in the text, through the whole Bible, is constantly tempering His power and authority. He's constantly saying, I'm going to be just a little bit smaller so that you have room to grow, so that you have room to blossom and flourish. I'm going to try to help you be the full flourishing that you can be. This is what God is doing with His power through the text. A good example of what Jesus is asking us here, to use our power to serve others. I don't often quote Richard Nixon, and this is probably going to be the only time. Richard Nixon, speaking of Mikhail Gorbachev, he says that Gorbachev chose, instead of using his power to protect his reforms, he would rather risk his power to save his reforms, rather than risk his reforms to save his power. In some way, each of us are called to that similarly. We are called to risk our power in order to save what we are called to do, rather than risk what we're called to do and be in order to save our power. It's a temptation that each of us have and will continue to face. Save your power and risk your influence or your reforms, or risk your power to save what you're supposed to be doing. You see, everybody has power. Every single one of us has power. You may be feeling and sensing in this time, no, Micah, I'm quite powerless. You don't know my story or my life. I'm powerless. But everybody has power. Everybody has power even when we come to church together. Probably the most powerful person in this room is actually our sound guy with the ability to choose what happens next, right? The sound person has the ultimate power. Thank you, sir. But you have power on a Sunday morning as well. There is somebody in this room who is suffering today, who is quite exhausted, didn't really want to be here. But you showed up. And the fact that they got to see you here today gave them just a little piece of joy. Maybe it was a big piece. You have the power to show up on a Sunday morning. Do not discount the power you have simply by walking in these doors on a Sunday morning. It's a gift that you give to each and every one of us. You have power in your life. You have been formed and shaped by God, very uniquely, very specially. And you have power in your life. Everybody does. A swan, as it walks on land, is quite powerless. It looks awkward. But when a swan is in the right waters, it looks incredibly powerful. And for each of us, there are waters in our life that we are meant to be exerting and influencing power. You have been given power like a swan. Now, as we age, whether we are a child, a teenager, and so on to senior age, our influence and power will change. The way we interact with power changes. As you are older, as you grow older, what ends up happening is you need to let go of the levers of power, the actual institutions that you perhaps had positions of power. You have to start letting them go. And it feels like I'm going to then be powerless. I won't have any ability to influence. What ends up happening as you let go of the levers of power is that you have the ability to bless. And here I don't mean, oh, I will bless as long as they behave correctly. That's not really blessing. But as you age and you let go of the levers of power, you have the ability to bless. And this allows you the ability to have even more influence than you probably had when you had the levers of power. You will have power as you learn new ways of working with power. All of us need to kind of pay attention to how we intersect with power in our lives. Jesus tells us that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, but we are not supposed to be that way. It's tough because sometimes we don't feel safe, we feel threatened. And so then we want to be bigger. And so we want to use our power to lift ourselves up. But of course, which takes more power? The power to lift yourself up or the power to lift somebody else up? Power can look very different than the normal understanding of power as domination. Power can be the ability to collaborate. Some people have this power and they are incredible with it. A place can have a bunch of people working there that seem to be disconnected. But the right person comes into that space and they bring the power to collaborate. And the place comes alive. We can see farther because we stand on the shoulders of giants. The giants are the ones with the power. If you perhaps are a giant, then helping somebody to stand on your shoulders is an incredible use of your power. It takes more power to lift somebody up rather than to push others down. Power, of course, is bad when it undermines the effectiveness of others, bypassing their voice and their input. Power can create, exacerbate, and take advantage of injustice. So as we pay attention in our own hearts, when we're faced with a decision, when we're paying attention to how we live our life, we can look, well, how am I using power, or how am I seeking power? Is it power that looks like Jesus? Jesus, is that you? And Jesus might be saying to you, no, Micah, I'm not there, I'm over here. Pay attention to the power. Does it look like and reflect the way God gives and uses power? Or is it a different sense of power, one that doesn't resonate with who Jesus is? As we pay attention to this in our life, what I have been trying to do this morning is just give us a sense of what power can look like, good power and bad power, and hopefully invite you to pay attention to power in your own life. Because as we pay attention to it, it gives us the opportunity to be in alignment with Jesus Christ. Well, why, Jesus, wouldn't you make this super easy? Just close doors when I'm supposed to say no, and open doors or windows when I'm supposed to say yes, and I'll just walk through it. Why does it have to be so hard? And I think God has done it this way because as we struggle, is this you, God? Am I supposed to be using power this way? Am I called to this opportunity or not? What ends up happening is we get to struggle with this, and we learn about who God is, and we learn about who we are. And I think this draws us into a maturity that otherwise, if it was just doors opening and closing, we don't get to reach this level of maturity. We get to move and live in union with Christ. And so as we struggle through experiencing power, using it, and letting it go, we get to move in alignment with the eternal one, Jesus Christ. And it is something that brings you alive in a way nothing else can. So my hope for you is that you will have a sense of power in your own life, and you'll have a sense of whether or not your using of that power aligns with the living Lord Jesus Christ, and that evermore you will seek to live your life in alignment with Him. Amen.